Welcome back to this presentation on the research group Earth System Data Exploration at the Jülich Supercomputing Centre. This is part 3, where I explain how we explore cutting-edge machine learning for the analysis of environmental data. Okay, let's move on. I've been mentioning machine learning already a few times now. And indeed, this is sort of the second pillar after the data, the Earth system data that our groups is resting on, and the core of what we're doing. So we explore cutting-edge machine learning for the analysis of environmental data. And let me begin this with a little gimmick here, an opinion piece found just recently on a blog here, that too many AI researchers think that real-world problems are not relevant. Well, we are basically taking the opposite view. We are coming with real-world problems to the AI community. So I mentioned earlier that we are trying to make relevant contributions to our system science, but we're also trying to make relevant contributions to the AI community. And I think our main contribution here is that we are coming with real-world problems and describing basically why certain methods, for example, that have been very popular in the AI community might not work so easily if you actually apply them to real-world problems, specifically the Earth system. So let me introduce why we're doing this machine learning. There are basically different ways to do Earth system science. So the first one is measuring and process understanding. These are images taken from the Helmholtz initiative MOSES. So that's an observing system development. The second way how to do Earth system science is through numerical modeling. So primarily you're building then huge computer codes, split the Earth in different boxes and simulate all kinds of Earth system interactions. And the third way is machine learning and statistics, a bit animated here. And this is really now where we are starting to develop our machine learning approaches and bring basically this new perspective of machine learning into Earth system science. And just interestingly, in this order, this happens to reflect my career path. So basically, I started my career with doing measurements and looking at atmospheric chemical processes, then moved on to numerical modeling, which I did for about 15 years. And now, since about 3 years, since I started the ESDE group, we are really looking into the application of statistics and machine learning for Earth system science. To put this into context of what's going on here in the Jülich Forschungszentrum, so the measuring and process understanding is really the core domain of the Earth and Environment Institute. So the Institute for Biogeochemistry 2 and 3, and the Institute for Energy and Climate Research 7 and 8. So they're looking at plant and agricultural processes, that's IBG 2 and 3, and tropospheric and stratospheric chemistry, that's IK 8 and 7. Numerical simulations are also primarily taken up by most of those institutes, so IBG 3, IK 7, IK 8. We also have at JSC the Simulation and Data Laboratory, Earth System Sciences. Currently, these are two different laboratories, one for climate and one for terrestrial systems, but in the new research plan that I introduced to you earlier, this POF plan, they're supposed to be merged beginning of next year. And on top of that, we have the so-called Joint Lab Exascale Earth System Modeling, which is a new Helmholtz initiative bridging across these different so-called research fields. So specifically our research field on information science, the research field Earth and Environment, and the research field space, transport, and air, whatever. And yeah, I happen to coordinate also this Joint Lab Exascale Earth System Modeling. Machine learning and statistics, I think we are at the forefront of this in Jülich and with respect to Earth system science analysis, but there's also some activities going on in IBG 3 and IBG 2. And there's also a work package in this Joint Lab Exascale Earth System Modeling to explore the use of machine learning in the Earth system modeling context. And so there are some nice links that we should exploit also in our work. So let me describe to you some of the synergies between ESDE and the Joint Lab Exascalar System Modeling. So both of them have to deal with big data workflows. So clearly in the Earth system modeling, there are huge data volumes generated, and they have to be managed and made available to the community for further use. The same happens in our case, using the data for machine learning analysis, for example, but also then generating other new data. Both of them are dealing with weather and climate data. Both of them have a relation to the high-performance computing system co-design. So basically, through developing these applications, we are contributing to basically design parameters for next-generation supercomputers. Both of them have a relation to deep learning, as I mentioned earlier. And maybe the difference is then that the foundation of the two groups is that our group is more founded on statistics and statistical methods, whereas the Joint Lab is more founded on the actual numerical simulations of the Earth system. Now, with respect to applying deep learning to Earth system science, most of you will know this image here now, which is one of the figures in our recently accepted article in the Philosophical Transactions journal. So it just summarizes a couple of challenges related to Earth system data, which are different from many other machine learning applications. So just to read out a few of those. So there are many different processes that determine the future evolution, and this happens on different temporal and spatial scales. We have coupling across a wide range of spatio-temporal scales. We have an autocorrelation of time series, which makes individual data samples not independent. We have imbalanced data, so scarcity of extreme events is a big problem related to building machine learning applications. We have dynamic correlation, so correlations that change over time depending on certain conditions. We have periodicity. We have non-Gaussian probability density functions of many weather variables. We have a need to quantify uncertainties. And finally, maybe more technical problem, we have a lot of data sets with missing and erroneous values in observation data. So where basically some quality control and quality filtering is necessary before the data can actually be used in machine learning applications. Just to highlight this one aspect here of the different spatio-temporal scales. In fact, there's a huge range of these scales. So what you see here is the famous Junge diagram. And I've extended that on the right with a few more labels, basically. So you see on this diagram different compounds in the atmosphere. So from OH radicals at the bottom left to chlorofluorocarbons at the top right. And they span a huge range of chemical lifetimes in the atmosphere, which then has immediate impacts also on the transport timescales. So just to give you one example, if you emit nitrogen oxides, NOx, somewhere in the middle of this diagram, into the atmosphere, it will live for a few days. And so basically, looking at typical wind speeds of something like 5 to 10 meters per second, you can then calculate how long this pollution of nitrogen oxides will be transported before it's basically gone. And of course, then if you have a species with longer lifetime, the transport range will be much longer. But also there's reverse interaction. So weather systems, for example, on a synaptic timescale, so looking at a few days, will basically then move things around. And this, of course, has stronger impacts on short-lived species, where also the gradients of concentrations are much larger. So on the right-hand side, you see a couple of labels here related to the Earth system. So the very short time scales, there are processes like turbulence and eddy fluxes, or OH chemistry, so radical chemistry. Then at time scales of about a minute to an hour, you have the nitrogen oxides chemistry, catalytic cycles, just as a keyword. And if you want to learn more about these things, I really recommend this book, Seinfeld and Pandas, to you. Then timescales of around a day have boundary layer mixing time. Several days, around 20 days, is the lifetime of tropospheric ozone. Then around a month, we have the intra-hemispheric mixing time, so mixing from the southern into the northern hemisphere and vice versa. 2 to 3 years is the ENSO time cycle. Intrahemispheric was around one hemisphere, and interhemispheric is north to south and south to north. Then methane lifetime was around 11 years, and ecosystem changes occurring on timescales of decades to centuries. So let me summarize a few high-level methodological approaches that we're actually pursuing in our group. So we're basically splitting our activities in three major lines of thought, so to speak. So we have the time series analysis. Here's a picture from Felix Kleinert's recently submitted paper. So keywords related to this time series analysis are focus on data selection, multi-station generalization, temporal scales, dynamic neighbor relations, and evaluation. And the application of this approach is really focusing on forecasting. The second big stream of things that we're doing is using video prediction methods. So to basically accomplish field forecasts. So this is a picture from Bing's manuscript that unfortunately was not published in the first round, but we're of course aiming to get this through review again. So here the keywords are more related to big data processing, spatial temporal patterns, physical consistency, scalable deep learning, and then also of course the evaluation again. And again here the main application is in the forecasting so far. And the third line of developments now is this mapping, where we basically try to exploit this data fusion approach more heavily to really generate from all kinds of data information new or some information about the air pollutants and their statistical properties. So this is from Clara's paper draft. And here the keywords are data selection, method selection, hyperparameter tuning, and unsupervised learning. And the application here is primarily geared towards the interpolation of data, not so much the forecasting. So basically with interpolation, it's meant that you can generate maps without any data gaps. So we know that the station network for air quality, for example, has wide gaps in between. So there are often 30 or even 100 kilometers between neighboring stations. And in order to really make an assessment, for example, on health impacts of air pollution, you really want a full coverage map. So basically every point on the map should have some air pollutant value associated with it. And the hope is basically that through this kind of mapping, we can achieve this. There are a couple of common conceptual topics related to all three applications. So I'm listing some of those here. So one of these buzzwords also in terms of machine learning is this explainable AI. So we're basically looking at diagnostics of the machine learning, constraints on the machine learning, and also uncertainties or uncertainty estimation. Another aspect, of course, considers the optimal architectures for solving the type of problems we are dealing with. So that reflects about the size of the neural networks, the complexity of the neural networks, and also the capabilities of the neural networks. So with that, I mean that, for example, if you're looking at time series analysis, you somehow want to capture things that happened in the past on different timescales, and there are different approaches how to do this. So either using recurrent networks or dealing with, for example, spectral transformations and other aspects. So this is something that Lucas is exploring. We are also always concerned with data imbalances. So again, here there are different approaches that we follow. So one is hierarchical networks, where you would first have a classifier, basically sorting the data into different categories before then training the regression network. There are studies that try to use oversampling to get rid of imbalances, or there is some potential in these new methods called, for example, attention learning, which allow you to learn certain rules from very few samples in the input data. And the fourth aspect that sort of also is a common theme across our three machine learning teams, so to speak, is the physics-guided AI. Here I don't yet have a thorough clue on what's possible. We've debated this a bit in machine learning coffee breaks, that there are different ways how to approach this. So through specifying loss functions with physical constraints, or looking at the latent space variables and influencing those somehow. But I think this is an emerging topic for our group, which will pick up more strongly during the next years. And there are also some common technical topics related to these machine learning approaches. So one of them is workflow design. This is also reflected actually in the different third-party projects that we've acquired. And so the common objectives here are to generate flexible workflows, extendable workflows, performant workflows, and finally they should ideally also be portable to other computer systems. We are all dealing with big data handling, so this concerns things like staging across the hierarchical storage architecture at the Jülich Supercomputing Centre. This is especially relevant, of course, when we are using these huge data sets from the methodological models. Other aspects concern memory consumption. So yeah, the video prediction work has already reached basically memory limits, which then limits, of course, the batch size that you can feed into these networks. So that's just one aspect, and similar aspects might occur in other areas. And then, of course, the throughput. So we want to be able to actually train and use these networks efficiently. And one of the things where this hinges on very largely is really the throughput of data. So to bring the data sets fast enough onto the GPUs, basically where the machine learning takes place, but also then process them. Another aspect that's common to all of our machine learning work is to create reference implementations, and this concerns benchmark data sets for the community to use, also evaluation metrics. These can be part of the code base, and those are the other aspects. Then, of course, the code management and code structure. So I guess we're trying to be role models basically for the community, how to develop these kind of deep learning applications in Earth system science, so that people can hopefully learn from us. And then once more people know about these things, we can, of course, then also leverage what they are developing and using those things. And finally, the platform usage. Once again, we are part of the Jülich Supercomputing Centre and have these huge, powerful systems to our availability, which only very few other research groups doing Earth system science with machine learning have. So that's a clear benefit that we have to be very aware of and should exploit to the best possible. And so here, of course, there are some technical concepts like the parallel machine learning, performance analysis, and also, for example, the early access application, so that we are actually specifically contributing to testing a new computing system, in this case, the Joules booster. So deep learning projects, let me just highlight those. So we have this IntelliAQ project, the ERC grant running from 2018 to 2023, with a total volume of 2.5 million, all of that in our research group. So this really gives us a lot of leverage to do nice things. And the big topics here in this project are, just as keywords, the interpolation, forecasting, and quality control of air quality data, big data fusion, and support of the tropospheric ozone assessment. So these are the key elements of this IntelliAQ project. Then we have the Deep Brain project, which is a grant from the German Ministry for Education and Research, running from 2018 to next year, 2021. Total volume of 2.2 million, where our share at in Jülich, and this means our group, is 870,000 euro. So that's at least 2 positions. And here the objectives are local scale rainfall prediction, to develop these kind of predictions through AI methods, development of scalable workflows, and the use of databases in deep learning applications. So our specific aspects here, as written in the proposal, are more technical, but of course we're also interested in the actual machine learning application. Then a new project, new kid on the block, hopefully starting November this year, is the KIST project. This is a grant from the Environmental Ministry, The total volume here is 2.5 million, where our group gets, not our group, but the Forschungszentrum in total has 572,000 euros, and some of that, a large share of that goes into our group. And here, the keywords are to have one PhD thesis on the influence of biogenic VOC emissions on tropospheric ozone using machine learning techniques. Another keyword is unsupervised learning, so further developing this mapping approach with unsupervised learning, and then the machine learning platform design, and also the development of e-learning modules on environmental AI. So we're also here collaborating with real, let's say, software development companies, and also a company who's developing e-learning solutions. And another grant that will hopefully then start early next year, it's been positively reviewed by the EU, is Malmström. So this is a European Horizon 2020 grant led by the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecast. Again, the total budget here is 2.2 million and our share is 400,000 euros. So unfortunately, one can see sort of a decline of the FZJ share in these projects, but this might not be a monotone trend, so maybe we can reverse that at some point. So here, the keywords are application of the video prediction methods to weather forecasting, the future HPC system design, and also a scalable deep learning platform design. And so you can see that many of these projects overlap in terms of these technical aspects, but also in terms of some of the machine learning applications that we're generating and developing. This concludes part 3 of this lecture series, where we talked about the use of machine learning to explore our system data. In the next part, we will look into exploiting modern IT concepts to build user-friendly, functional, high-performance environmental data services.